The metal floors of the space station were cold under Minji's bare feet as she walked through the dark corridors. Her baby Daeho was crying again, and she held him close to her chest, trying to make him stop. The sound echoed off the walls, making her feel even more alone in this strange place far from home. She had been walking for hours, looking for someone who might help her. The other people on the station turned away when they saw her coming. They knew she had nothing to trade and no money to pay for anything. Her clothes were torn and dirty from the long journey through space. Her face was thin from not eating enough food for many days. Minji stopped in front of a door that had words written on it in several languages. One of them was Korean, and it said Cargo Bay Supervisor. She could hear voices inside talking about shipping schedules and supply runs. Maybe this person would listen to her. Maybe this person would help her and her baby. She knocked on the door softly at first, then harder when no one answered. The voices inside stopped talking, and she heard footsteps coming toward the door. When it opened, she saw a man with kind eyes and gray hair. He looked surprised to see her standing there with her crying baby. Captain Jiwon had been working late again, checking the lists of supplies that needed to be sent to different colonies. He ran cargo ships between the outer worlds and the main stations. It was hard work, but he liked helping people get what they needed to survive in space. When he heard the knocking, he thought it was one of his crew members coming to report a problem. Instead, he found a young woman holding a baby. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her eyes were red from crying and her hands were shaking. The baby in her arms was very small and kept making noise like he was hungry or sick. Minji looked up at the man and tried to speak, but no words came out at first. She had practiced what she would say, but now that she was here, it seemed impossible. How could she ask a stranger to help her when she had nothing to give back? How could she tell him about the terrible things that had happened to her world? The man stepped back and gestured for her to come inside his office. It was warm and bright compared to the cold corridors. There were pictures on the walls showing different planets and star systems. His desk was covered with papers and computer screens showing cargo manifests and flight schedules. Gowon went to a small machine in the corner and made 2 cups of hot tea. He gave one to Minji and sat down across from her. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around the office with wide eyes. The warm drink made Minji feel a little better, and she finally found her voice. She told him her name was Minji and her baby was called Daeho. She said they had come from a farming colony called New Bizin that was attacked by aliens 3 months ago. Most of the people there had been killed, including her husband Kyung, who had tried to protect their home. She had escaped with only her baby and a few belongings. Since then, she had been traveling from station to station trying to reach Earth where she had family. But each time she traded something for passage, she had less and less to trade. Now she had nothing left except the clothes she was wearing and her baby. She had not eaten a real meal in 5 days, and Daeho was getting sick from not having proper food. Ji-won listened to her story without interrupting. He had heard similar tales from other refugees who had lost their homes to alien attacks. The outer colonies were always the first targets because they were far from the main human military bases. Families like Minji's were left to defend themselves with farming tools and old hunting rifles. When she finished talking, Minji looked down at her baby and then back at Ji-won. Her face turned red with shame as she prepared to make her desperate offer. She had never thought she would have to do something like this, but she had no choice. Her baby needed food and medicine, and she would do anything to save him. She told Ji-won that she knew she had nothing valuable to trade, but she could offer him herself. She would do whatever he wanted if he would just give them passage to Earth. And some food for Daeho. She said she was healthy and strong and would work hard to please him. Her voice got quieter as she spoke, and tears started falling down her face. Ji-won felt angry, but not at her. He was angry at the aliens who had destroyed her world and at the system that forced desperate people to make choices like this. He had a younger sister who had died in the war, and seeing Minji reminded him of her. Both were brave women who had faced impossible situations with dignity. He stood up from his chair and walked around to where she was sitting. For a moment, Minji thought he was going to accept her offer, and she closed her eyes, waiting for whatever would happen next. Instead, she felt his hand gently touch her shoulder in a fatherly way. Jiwan told her that she would not have to do anything like that. He said that humans should help other humans, especially those who had suffered so much. He asked her to tell him more about her background and what kind of work she had done on New BUSAN.min. Ji was surprised by his kindness and told him that she had been an agricultural engineer. She had designed and maintained the hydroponic systems that grew food for the colony. She understood how to make plants grow in artificial environments and how to maximize crop yields with limited resources. As she talked about her work, her voice became stronger and more confident. This was something she knew well and was proud of. She had helped feed thousands of people on New Bizan and had even developed new growing techniques that other colonies wanted to learn about. G1 realized that this meeting might not be a coincidence. He had been struggling to keep the space station's food production systems running properly. The previous agricultural manager had left last month and G1 had been trying to do the job himself. But he was much better with spaceships than with plants. The hydroponic gardens on the station were critical for feeding the crew and the many people who lived there permanently. If the systems failed, everyone would have to rely on expensive food shipments from other worlds. Having someone with Minji's skills could solve a major problem for the station. He looked at the young mother holding her baby and made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of offering her charity, he would offer her a job. She had the skills he needed and he could give her the security and future she was looking for, but first he wanted to make sure she understood that this was not pity. This was business. The station needed her expertise, and she needed a home for herself and her son. It could be a partnership that would benefit everyone involved. Jiwan went back to his desk and pulled out a job application form. He told Minji that he had a different kind of offer to make her. One that would give her dignity along with security. One that would let her build something instead of just surviving from day to day. The baby, Daeho, had fallen asleep in his mother's arms while she talked. His tiny face was peaceful and his breathing was soft and regular. Looking at him, Minji felt hope for the first time in months. Maybe their journey through the darkness of space had finally led them to a place where they could build a new life. She looked at the application form and then at Jiwan's sincere face. This stranger was offering her something she had never expected to find again after losing everything. He was offering her a chance to use her skills to help others, while building a future for her son. For the first time since the attack on New Bizan, Minji allowed herself to believe that maybe things could get better. Maybe this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. One where she would not have to trade her dignity for survival, but could earn her place through hard work and knowledge. The space station hummed quietly around them as mother and child prepared to start their new life among the stars. The next morning, Minji woke up in a real bed for the first time in months. The small quarters that Jiwon had given her were simple but clean. There was a bed, a desk, and a small area for preparing food. Most importantly, there was a crib for baby Daeho, who was sleeping peacefully after his first full night of rest in weeks. She looked around the room and wondered if this was all a dream. Yesterday, she had been ready to give up everything just to keep her baby alive. Now she had a safe place to sleep and the promise of honest work. She touched the job application that Jiwan had given her. It was still there on the desk where she had left it the night before. Daeho started to wake up and make small sounds. Minji picked him up and was amazed to see how much better he looked after just one night of proper sleep. His eyes were brighter, and he was not crying as much. The medical scanner that Jiwan had brought showed that the baby was malnourished, but not seriously ill. There was a knock at the door, and Minji opened it to find Jiwan standing there with a tray of food. He had brought fresh fruit, synthetic proteins, and milk for the baby. The smell made her stomach growl loudly, and she realized how hungry she still was despite eating the night before. Jiwan smiled and set the tray down on the small table. He told her that this was not charity, but an advance on her first paycheck. He wanted her to be healthy and strong so she could do the job properly. He also brought clothes that would fit her better and some basic supplies for taking care of Daeho. While Minji ate breakfast, Jiwon explained what her job would involve. The space station had 3 large hydroponic gardens that grew food for over 2,000 people. The systems were old and not working as well as they should. Food production had dropped by 30% over the past year, and people were starting to worry about shortages. He showed her computer files with data about the gardens. Minji looked at the numbers and immediately saw several problems. The nutrient mixtures were wrong for the types of plants they were growing. The lighting systems were not providing the right spectrum of light. The water recycling was inefficient and wasting resources. As she studied the data, her mind began working on solutions. This was the kind of problem she had solved many times. On New Bazen, she started drawing diagrams on paper showing how the systems could be improved. Her confidence grew as she realized she could make a real difference here. Jiwon watched her work and saw the change in her attitude. Yesterday she had been broken and desperate. Today she was becoming the skilled engineer she had been before. The attack. Her eyes were bright with interest and her hands moved quickly as she sketched out ideas. He told her that the job came with a good salary, medical care for both her and Daeho, and permanent residence on the station. If she did well, there might be opportunities to expand her role and take on bigger projects. The station administrators were always looking for talented people who could help improve life for everyone. Minji looked up from her drawings and asked why he was being so generous. She still could not believe that a stranger would offer her so much just because she had useful skills. In her experience, people usually wanted something in return for their help. Ji-won sat down across from her, and his expression became serious. He told her about his sister who had died during an alien attack on a mining colony 5 years ago. She had been a teacher who helped children learn to read and write. When the attack came, she had stayed behind to make sure all her students got to the evacuation ship safely. He said that his sister had always believed that humans were strongest when they helped each other. She had died protecting children who were not even her own because she thought every life was valuable. Since then, he had tried to live by the same principle. When he saw someone who needed help, he tried to give it. Minji felt tears in her eyes as she listened to his story. She understood the pain of losing someone you love to alien violence. She also understood the desire to honor their memory by helping others. Maybe this was fate bringing them together so they could both heal from their losses? She asked him to show her the hydroponic gardens so she could see the problems firsthand. They walked through the corridors of the station with Daeho sleeping in a carrier on her chest. Other people nodded politely as they passed, but Minji noticed some of them staring at her with curiosity. The gardens were located in the central section of the station where they could get the most stable artificial gravity. When the doors opened, Minji gasped at the sight. The space was huge with rows and rows of growing plants under bright lights. But she could immediately see that something was wrong. Many of the plants looked sick with yellow leaves and stunted growth. The air smelled stale and humid, but not in the healthy way that good gardens should smell. Some sections had been sealed off completely because the equipment had failed and no one knew how to fix it. Ji-won introduced her to the small crew that had been trying to maintain the gardens. They were good people, but none of them had formal training in agricultural systems. They had been doing their best, but were clearly struggling with problems they did not understand. As Minji walked through the gardens, she made notes about everything she saw. The crew followed her around, asking questions and listening carefully to her answers. She could see hope in their faces as she explained what was wrong and how it could be fixed. One of the workers was an older woman named Soon who had been trying to keep the tomato plants alive. She showed Minji how the leaves were turning brown and falling off. Soon was worried that they would lose the entire crop and there would be no fresh vegetables for months. Minji examined the plants and quickly diagnosed the problem: the nutrient solution was too acidic and the roots were being damaged. She explained how to adjust the pH levels and which minerals needed to be added. Soon listened carefully and asked intelligent questions about the process. By the end of the day, Minji had made a complete assessment of all 3 gardens. She had identified dozens of problems but also saw solutions for each one. Some would be easy to fix with simple adjustments to the existing systems. Others would require new equipment or major renovations. She prepared a detailed report for Jawan explaining what needed to be done and how much it would cost. She also included a timeline, showing how long each repair would take and what the expected improvements would be. The station could increase food production by 50% within 6 months if they followed her recommendations. G1 read the report and was impressed by her thoroughness and professionalism. This was exactly the kind of expertise the station needed. He told her that the administrators would approve funding for the necessary repairs and equipment. Her first job would be to start implementing the changes. Immediately, that evening, Minji signed the job contract, officially becoming the new agricultural systems manager for the station. As she wrote her name on the document, she felt like she was signing up for a new life. No longer would she be a refugee dependent on the charity of others. She would be a valued member of the community, contributing her skills to help everyone. Daeho was playing on a blanket on the floor, reaching for colorful toys that Jawan had brought. The baby was getting stronger every day and was starting to smile more often. Minji watched him and imagined what his life might be like growing up on the station, surrounded by gardens and learning from the diverse group of people who live there. She thought about her husband Kyung and wished he could see how their son was going to grow up. He had always said that the most important thing was to build something that would last beyond your own lifetime. Now she had the chance to do exactly that by creating systems that would feed people for generations to come. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate nighttime, Minji felt truly hopeful for the first time since the attack on New Bizan. She had found more than just safety for herself and her baby. She had found a purpose and a community that valued her contributions. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of turning the struggling gardens into something magnificent. 6 months had passed since Minji started working in the gardens, and the changes were amazing. The plants that had been sick and dying were now green and healthy. The tomatoes were bigger and more flavorful than anyone on the station had tasted in years. Even the sealed sections had been reopened and were producing food again. Minji walked through the gardens every morning, checking on the different growing areas. Baby Daeho came with her in his carrier, and he seemed to love being surrounded by all the plants. He would reach out his little hands toward the colorful vegetables and make happy sounds when the automatic sprinklers turned on. The other workers had learned quickly from Minji's teachings. Soon had become expert at managing the tomato and pepper plants. A young man named Tae had taken over the leafy green section and was experimenting with new varieties. Everyone was proud of the work they were doing and excited about the results. Word about the station's improved food production had spread to other colonies. Ship captains who stopped for supplies were amazed by the fresh vegetables and asked how the gardens had become so successful. Some offered to pay extra for the high-quality produce to take to their homeworlds. Jawan had noticed the changes too. Not just in the gardens, but in the whole atmosphere of the station. People seemed happier and healthier. The dining areas were always full of people enjoying fresh meals together. Children played in the observation decks that overlooked the gardens, learning about where their food came from. He also noticed changes in Minji herself. She was no longer the frightened refugee who had knocked on his door. She had become confident and skilled, speaking with authority about agricultural systems. Other department heads came to her for advice about resource management and efficiency improvements. One evening after the gardens had been closed for the day, Jiwon found Minji in her small office reviewing production reports. Daeho was sleeping in his crib nearby, and soft music was playing from a small speaker. The scene looked peaceful and domestic in a way that made Jiwon's chest feel tight. He had been thinking about Minji more often lately. Not just as an employee, but as a person. He admired her strength and intelligence. He enjoyed their conversations about everything from plant genetics to space exploration. When she laughed at his jokes, he felt happier than he had in years. Minji looked up from her computer and smiled when she saw him. She had been working on a proposal for expanding the gardens into unused sections of the station. The population was growing as more refugees arrived, and they would need more food production to keep everyone fed. She showed him her plans for 3 new growing areas that could increase their output by another 30%. The designs were clever and efficient, using vertical growing systems that would maximize the use of available space. She had also calculated the costs and timeline for construction. G1 studied the proposals and was impressed by her vision. She was not just thinking about solving current problems but planning for the future. Her ideas could make the station completely self-sufficient for food production and even allow them to export surplus to other colonies. He told her that the station administrators would definitely approve the expansion project. They had been getting requests from other colonies asking for advice about improving their own food systems. There was talk of creating a training program where people could come to learn from Minji's expertise. The idea excited Minji but also made her nervous. She had never thought of herself as a teacher, but she remembered how much her own mentors had helped her learn. Maybe she could pass on her knowledge to others who were struggling with similar problems. Daeho started to wake up and make small sounds. Minji picked him up and was amazed to see how much he had grown. At 1-year-old, he was walking and saying simple words. He loved being in the gardens and would try to help with simple tasks like picking ripe fruit. G1 watched her with her son and felt a warm feeling in his chest. They had become like a family to him, even though they were not related by blood. He had grown attached to both of them and could not imagine the station without their presence. He asked Minji if she ever thought about her old life on New Bison. She was quiet for a moment, then said she still missed her husband and their old home. But she was grateful for the new life they had built here. Daeho would grow up knowing many different kinds of people and learning skills that would help him succeed anywhere in the galaxy. She said that sometimes she felt guilty about being happy when so many people had died in the attack. But she thought her husband would want her to build something good from the tragedy. The gardens were feeding people and bringing them together. That seemed like a worthy way to honor his memory. Jawan understood her feelings. He had struggled with similar guilt after his sister's death. Eventually he had realized that the best way to honor someone's memory was to live in a way that would make them proud. Minji was doing exactly that by using her skills to help others. Over the following weeks, they worked together on the expansion plans. Minji handled the technical aspects, while Jiwon managed the business and administrative details. They made a good team with complementary skills and shared goals. The construction began, and soon the station was buzzing with activity. Workers were building new growing chambers, while engineers installed advanced hydroponic systems. Minji supervised every aspect of the project, making sure everything was done correctly. During this time, she also began developing the training program. She created detailed manuals explaining her techniques and designed hands-on exercises for students. The first group of trainees was scheduled to arrive in 2 months from colonies throughout the sector. G1 watched her work with admiration. She had transformed from a desperate refugee into a leader who was helping shape the future of human space colonization. Her innovations in food production could help thousands of people live better lives on distant worlds. But he also noticed that she was working too hard. She would stay up late reviewing technical specifications and wake up early to check on the construction progress. She rarely took breaks and seemed to be pushing herself to exhaustion. One evening, he found her asleep at her desk with her head on a pile of reports. Daeho was playing quietly in his crib, having learned not to disturb his mother when she was working. Jiwon gently woke her and insisted that she take some time off. He offered to watch Daeho while she got some rest, but she said she was fine. She had too much work to do and too many people depending on her. She could not afford to take breaks when so much was at stake. G1 realized that she was driving herself so hard because she still felt like she had to prove herself worthy of the help she had received. She was trying to pay back a debt that he had never expected her to repay. He needed to help her understand that she had already earned her place in their community. He told her that the station was not just benefiting from her work, but from her presence. She had brought new energy and hope to everyone who lived there. People looked up to her not just as a skilled engineer, but as an example of human resilience and determination. As the expansion project neared completion, Minji finally began to relax and enjoy her success. The new gardens were beautiful and productive beyond her original expectations. The training program was attracting students from colonies across the sector who wanted to learn her techniques. She had also started to notice that her relationship with Jiwon was changing. They spent more time together both at work and in their free time. He had begun joining her for dinner most evenings, and they would talk for hours about their hopes and plans for the future. Daeho had become attached to Jiwon too. The little boy would run to him whenever he appeared and had started calling him by a Korean word that meant uncle. Jiwon loved playing with the child and had become an important father figure in his life. One evening as they watched the sunset through the station's observation windows, Minji realized that she was falling in love with the man who had saved her life. She had thought she would never feel that way about anyone again after losing her husband. But Jiwon had shown her that it was possible to build new love without forgetting old love. She wondered if he felt the same way about her. He was kind and attentive, but she was not sure if his feelings were romantic or just friendly. She was afraid to risk their professional relationship by bringing up personal matters, but as they stood together, watching the stars with Daeho playing at their feet, she felt hopeful about the future. Whatever happened between them, they had already built something beautiful together. The gardens were thriving, the community was growing, and her son was healthy and happy. She had learned that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. A desperate plea for help had led to a fulfilling career. A chance meeting had led to deep friendship. And maybe friendship was leading to something even more wonderful. The station continued its journey through space carrying its cargo of dreams and growing things toward an uncertain but promising future. The first group of students had arrived, and the station was more alive than ever. 25 agricultural engineers from different colonies were learning Minji's techniques for growing food in space. They came from worlds with different climates and challenges, but all shared the same goal of feeding their people better. Minji stood in front of the group explaining how to balance nutrient solutions for maximum plant growth. She had become comfortable speaking to large groups and enjoyed sharing her knowledge. The students asked many questions, and she was impressed by their dedication to learning. Among the students was a young woman named Hannah from a desert colony, where water was scarce. She was particularly interested in Minji's water recycling methods that could turn waste into clean growing medium. Another student named Junho came from a cold world where they had to grow all their food indoors year-round. Daeho had celebrated his second birthday and was now walking everywhere and talking in simple sentences. He loved having all the students around and would follow them through the gardens trying to help with their work. Many of the students had children of their own back home and enjoyed playing with the curious little boy. The training program had become so successful that other stations were asking to host similar programs. The Earth Colonial Authority had sent representatives to observe the classes, and they were impressed by what they saw. They offered funding to expand the program too. 10 more locations. G1 had been working with the Colonial Authority representatives to develop a formal partnership. They wanted to create a network of agricultural training centers throughout human space with Minji's station as the headquarters. It would be a huge expansion that could help thousands of colonies improve their food production, but Minji was worried about the bureaucracy that would come with government funding. She had seen how committees and regulations could slow down important work. She wanted to make sure they could maintain their independence and continue to innovate without too much interference. She shared her concerns with Jiwon during one of their evening walks through the gardens. They had started taking these walks together every night after Daeho was asleep. It was their time to talk about work and life and their plans for the future. Jiwon understood her concerns but thought the partnership could be beneficial if they negotiated the right terms. They could set conditions that protected their autonomy while gaining access to resources that would help them reach more people. The key was to make sure they remained in control of the educational content and methods. As they walked past the new growing sections, Minji marveled at how much the station had changed. What had started as struggling gardens with sick plants had become a thriving agricultural center. Students and workers from dozens of different worlds were collaborating to solve problems and share knowledge. She pointed out a section where Hannah was experimenting with desert plants that could grow in very little water. In another area, Junho was testing cold-resistant varieties that might work on ice planets. Each student was contributing their own expertise while learning from others. The diversity of the community had created unexpected benefits. People from different cultures brought different approaches to problem solving. Traditional farming methods from Earth combined with innovative techniques developed on frontier worlds. The result was a constant stream of new ideas and improvements. Jiwon had noticed that Minji seemed happier and more relaxed than she had been in months. The success of the training program had given her confidence that her work was making a real difference. She no longer felt like she was just repaying a debt, but was building something that would outlast her own lifetime. He had also noticed that their relationship was changing. They spent more time together both at work and in their personal lives. They had developed inside jokes and shared memories. When other people saw them together, they assumed they were a couple, even though neither had said anything about romance. One evening after a particularly successful graduation ceremony for the first group of students, Minji invited Jiwon to her quarters for dinner. She had cooked a traditional Korean meal using vegetables from the gardens. Daeho was excited to have a guest and insisted on helping serve the food. During dinner, they talked about the students, who had just left to return to their homeworlds. Each one had developed detailed plans for improving their colony's food systems. Some were planning to start their own training programs using what they had learned. Others were going to work with colonial governments to implement new policies. Gowon said he was proud of what Minji had accomplished. In just 2 years, she had transformed not only their station but was beginning to influence food production throughout human space. Her innovations were being adopted by colonies she had never even visited. Minji felt emotional hearing his praise. She remembered the desperate woman who had offered herself for food and passage just to keep her baby alive. That person felt like a stranger now. The work had given her purpose and dignity that she had never expected to find again. After dinner, they sat on the small couch in her living area while Daeho played with his toys on the floor. The lighting was dim and peaceful, creating an intimate atmosphere. They talked quietly about their hopes for the future and the challenges they still faced. Iwan found himself looking at Minji's face in the soft light. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. She was intelligent and strong and kind. She had overcome tremendous hardship and used her pain to help others. He realized that he had fallen in love with her completely. He was about to tell her how he felt when Daeho crawled over and climbed into his lap. The little boy was getting sleepy and wanted to be held. Jiwon picked him up and rocked him gently while singing a quiet song. Minji watched them together and felt her heart fill with warmth. She realized that Jiwon had become more than just her employer or friend. He had become a father figure to Daeho and a partner in all their important decisions. When she imagined her future, she could not picture it without him being there. The moment felt perfect, but also fragile. They were both aware that their relationship was at a turning point. They could continue as friends and colleagues, or they could risk everything by admitting their deeper feelings. Either choice would change their lives forever. Daeho fell asleep in Jiwon's arms, and Minji gently took him to put him in his crib. When she returned, Jiwon was still sitting on the couch looking thoughtful. She sat down beside him closer than usual and felt her heart beating faster. They talked for another hour about small things, but both were aware of the tension between them. Finally, Jiwon took her hand and said he had something important to tell her. He had been thinking about their future together and wanted to know if she felt the same way before he could say more. The station's alarm system activated. Red lights flashed and a voice announced that there was an emergency in the main engineering section. As the senior staff, they both needed to respond immediately. They rushed to the engineering level and found that a coolant leak had caused several systems to shut down. The main life support was still working, but the backup systems were offline. If they could not fix the problem quickly, the station would be in danger. Minji immediately began analyzing the environmental systems to see how the gardens could help. The plants produced oxygen and cleaned the air, but they needed power to run. The circulation pumps. She worked quickly to reroute power from non-essential systems to keep the gardens running. G1 coordinated with the engineering teams to locate and repair the coolant leak. It was dangerous work that required shutting down additional systems. They had to work fast before the station's life support reached critical levels. The crisis lasted for 6 hours, but they managed to fix the leak and restore all systems. Everyone on the station had worked together to solve the problem. The students had helped monitor the gardens while the regular crew handled the technical repairs. When the emergency was over, Minji and Jiwon were exhausted but relieved. They had proven that their community could handle serious challenges. The cooperation between people from different worlds had been essential to their success. As they walked back to the residential section, Jiwon took Minji's hand again. The crisis had reminded him how precious and fragile life could be. He did not want to waste any more time hiding his feelings. He told her that he loved her and wanted to build a life together. Not just as colleagues, but as partners in every sense. He wanted to help raise Daeho and create a family that would last forever. Minji felt tears in her eyes as she heard his words. She had been afraid to hope for this kind of happiness again. But now she realized that love was not something you could lose and never find again. It was something that could grow in unexpected places. If you were brave enough to nurture it. She told him that she loved him too and had been hoping he would say those words. They had already built something beautiful together in the gardens and the training program. Now they could build something even more precious in their personal lives. As they stood in the corridor, surrounded by the humming of the station's systems, they kissed for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise for the future. They were no longer just two people who had helped each other survive. They were partners ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The station continued its journey. 3 years had passed since Minji and Jiwon declared their love for each other. They had married in a beautiful ceremony held in the main garden with hundreds of friends and colleagues celebrating with them. Daeho had walked down the aisle carrying the rings with serious concentration while everyone smiled at his determination. The training program had expanded beyond their wildest dreams. They now had permanent facilities on 12 different stations and had graduated over 300 agricultural specialists. The network of former students was sharing knowledge across human space and food production had improved dramatically on dozens of worlds. Minji was working in her office, reviewing applications from colonies that wanted to join the program. There were so many requests that they had to be selective about which ones to accept. Priority was given to colonies that faced the greatest challenges or had the most potential to help other worlds. Daeho was now 5 years old and had become a fixture in the gardens. He knew the names of all the plants and could explain basic growing principles to visitors. Many people joked that he would probably become an agricultural engineer, like his mother when he grew up. The boy had also become fluent in several languages, from spending time with students and workers from different worlds. He switched easily between Korean English and the trade language that was common in space stations. His ability to communicate with everyone made him popular with people from all backgrounds. Life on the station had settled into a comfortable routine. Minji managed the training programs and research projects while Jiwon handled logistics and business relationships. They worked together seamlessly and had become known throughout the sector as an effective team, but on this particular morning the routine was shattered by an emergency alert. The station's long-range sensors had detected a large fleet of alien ships approaching from the outer rim. The signatures matched those of the species that had destroyed New Bizan and many other human colonies. Jiwon rushed to the command center while Minji began implementing emergency protocols in the agricultural sections. They had drilled for this type of situation but had hoped it would never happen. The attacking species was known for destroying everything they could not use and taking no prisoners. The alien fleet was still several hours away but moving fast. The station's defensive systems were limited since it was primarily a civilian facility. A distress signal had been sent to the nearest military base, but help would not arrive for at least 6 hours. Minji gathered her key staff and began preparing the gardens for emergency mode. If the main life support systems were damaged, the plants would need to provide oxygen and air filtration for the entire station. She had modified the systems for exactly this purpose after the engineering crisis years earlier. The alien ships arrived without warning and began their attack immediately. Energy weapons struck the station's outer hull, causing explosions that shook the entire structure. The lights flickered and several systems went offline as power conduits were damaged. Jawan coordinated the evacuation of non-essential personnel to the most protected areas of the station. The training students and their families were moved to emergency shelters while the crew remained at their posts. Everyone knew that their survival depended on keeping the critical systems running. The main life support center took a direct hit and began failing rapidly. Toxic gases started leaking into the air circulation system and the oxygen levels began dropping. Without immediate action, everyone on the station would be dead within 2 hours. Minji made a desperate decision. She could use the agricultural systems to clean the air and provide oxygen, but it would require redirecting all available power to the gardens. The plants would consume enormous amounts of energy, but they could keep everyone alive until help arrived. She worked frantically to reconfigure the garden's atmospheric processors. It was dangerous work that required her to be in the same areas where toxic gases were leaking. She wore an emergency breathing mask but knew that even a small malfunction could be fatal. Daeho was safely in one of the emergency shelters with the other children, but he was crying for his mother. The other adults tried to comfort him, but he knew something terrible was happening. The explosions and alarms had frightened all the children and they huddled together seeking comfort. The modifications to the garden systems were working, but barely. The plants were processing the toxic gases and producing clean oxygen, but the energy requirements were enormous. Minji had to shut down all non-essential systems, including heating, lighting, and even some of the defensive weapons. G1 watched the power levels dropping and realized they were in a race against time. The gardens were keeping everyone alive, but they were consuming power faster than the reactors could produce it. If the energy ran out before help arrived, they would still die. Despite Minji's heroic efforts, he made the difficult decision to shut down even more systems, including some of the emergency shelters. The people in those areas would have to be moved to the central sections where the air was being cleaned by the plants. It was risky but necessary to conserve power. The alien attack continued for what felt like hours but was actually only 90 minutes. The station's limited weapons managed to disable a few of the smaller ships, but the main fleet was too powerful. They seemed to be taking their time destroying the station piece by piece. Minji collapsed from exhaustion after completing the atmospheric modifications. She had been working in areas filled with toxic gases for over an hour and her breathing mask was running low on air. But the gardens were now functioning as a massive life support system for the entire station. Jiwon found her unconscious in the main garden and carried her to the medical center. The doctor said she had been poisoned by the gases but would recover with treatment. Her quick thinking and technical skill had saved everyone on the station, but nearly killed her in the process. As Minji was being treated, the alien ships suddenly stopped their attack and began withdrawing. Long-range sensors showed human military vessels approaching at maximum speed. The cavalry had arrived just in time to prevent the complete destruction of the station. The rescue fleet engaged the alien ships in a running battle that lasted for several hours. Most of the aliens escaped, but they had been prevented from completing their mission. The station was badly damaged, but still intact with all residents alive. When Minji woke up in the medical center, she immediately asked about the gardens and the air quality. The doctor assured her that her modifications had worked perfectly and everyone was safe. The toxic gases had been completely filtered out and oxygen levels were back to normal. Jiwon was sitting beside her bed holding her hand. He told her that she was a hero who had saved over 2,000 lives. Her innovations had turned the gardens from a source of food into a weapon of survival. The entire station owed their lives to her quick thinking and courage. Daeho was brought to see his mother and he hugged her tightly. He had been scared when she disappeared during the attack, but the other adults had explained that she was working to keep everyone safe. He was proud of his mother and told her she was the bravest person he knew. The attack had damaged many of the station systems, but the gardens had survived mostly intact. The plants had actually thrived during the crisis because of the extra carbon dioxide from all the people breathing in the confined spaces. Nature had a way of turning even disasters into opportunities for growth. As the station began the long process of repairs, Minji realized that they had proven something important. The agricultural systems were not just about growing food, but about creating sustainable environments where humans could survive anywhere. Her work had literally saved lives in the most dramatic way possible. The news of the attack and the heroic defense spread throughout human space. Other colonies wanted to know how the station had survived when so many others had been destroyed. The answer was simple but profound: preparation planning, and the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect the community. Minji's reputation as an agricultural engineer was now enhanced by her status as a hero. But she was more interested in the lessons they had learned about emergency life support systems. She began developing new protocols that other stations could use to prepare for similar attacks. The training program resumed within a month of the attack. The students who had been there during the crisis became some of the most dedicated graduates. They had seen firsthand how agricultural systems could mean the difference between life and death in space. As the station returned to normal operations, Minji and Jiwon reflected on how much their lives had changed. They had started as strangers brought together by desperation and had built something that could survive the worst that the galaxy could throw at them. The gardens continued to grow and flourish, carrying within them the hope and determination of all the people who had worked to create them. They had become more than just a source of food. They were a symbol of human resilience and the power of cooperation in the face of impossible odds. The alien attack had tested everything they had built, but had not destroyed it. Instead, it had proven that their vision of sustainable communities in space was not just idealistic but essential for survival. The future belonged to those who could adapt and grow, no matter what challenges they faced. 5 years had passed since the alien attack, and the station had been rebuilt stronger than ever before. The new design included multiple backup life support systems and emergency protocols that had been developed from Minji's innovations during the crisis. Other stations throughout human space had adopted similar designs, making all colonies safer. Minji stood on the observation deck watching her 10-year-old son Daeho lead a group of younger children through the expanded gardens. He was explaining how the different plants worked together to create a balanced ecosystem. His voice was confident and clear as he shared knowledge that most adults found difficult to understand. The boy had grown tall and strong with his father's steady demeanor and his mother's quick intelligence. He spoke 4 languages fluently and could discuss agricultural science with visiting professors. But he was still a child who loved playing games and exploring every corner of the station. The training program had evolved into a full university that attracted students from across human space and even some friendly alien species. The campus now included dormitories, laboratories, and research facilities that supported hundreds of people. What had started as a desperate attempt to fix broken gardens had become a center of learning for the galaxy. G1 approached carrying a formal document that had just arrived from Earth. The Colonial Council had voted to establish the station as the official headquarters for agricultural development in human space. They were offering unlimited funding and resources to expand the programs even further. Minji read the document carefully, noting all the conditions and requirements that came with the government's support. She had learned to be cautious about bureaucratic partnerships that promised much but demanded control in return. Their independence had been crucial to their success. She discussed the offer with Jiwon as they walked through the newest section of gardens. This area had been designed by former students who had returned as teachers, bringing innovations from their homeworlds. The diversity of techniques and approaches had created growing systems more advanced than anything on Earth. One section featured vertical farms that used minimal water developed by engineers from desert worlds. Another area had cold-resistant plants that could survive in the harsh conditions of ice planets. A third section experimented with high-gravity growing methods for colonies on heavy worlds. The university had also become a diplomatic meeting place where different species could share knowledge about sustainable living. Insectoid engineers had contributed ideas about hive-based organization, while aquatic species had shared techniques for water recycling that were far superior to human methods. Minji had been invited to speak at conferences on dozens of worlds, and had become known as one of the leading experts on space agriculture. But she preferred to stay on the station where she could continue hands-on research and teaching. This was her home and her life's work was here. Daeho finished his tour with the children and ran over to his parents. He was excited because he had been accepted into the advanced program that would let him start formal engineering studies even though he was still young. His natural ability with plants and systems had impressed all his teachers. The family had dinner together that evening in their expanded quarters. They now had a proper home with separate rooms for everyone and a kitchen where Minji could cook traditional Korean meals using vegetables from the gardens. The walls were covered with pictures from their travels and gifts from students who had become like extended family. After dinner, they walked through the gardens as had become their evening tradition. The artificial sunset created beautiful colors that reflected off the transparent walls. Children from many different worlds played together while their parents relaxed in areas designed for socializing. Minji thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She remembered the desperate woman who had offered herself for passage and could barely believe that person had been her. The love of her family and the purpose of her work had transformed her into someone she never imagined she could become. Ji-won pointed out a new memorial that had been built to honor all the people who had died in alien attacks. It included the names of everyone from New Bizen, including Minji's first husband, Kyung. The memorial was surrounded by flowering plants that represented hope growing from loss. Daeho had learned about his biological father and was proud of the man who had died protecting his family. But he also loved Ji-won, who had raised him and taught him important lessons about leadership and responsibility. He was fortunate to have been influenced by two good men, even though he had only known one of them. The station received a priority message from a distant colony that was facing food shortages due to crop failures. They were requesting emergency assistance and asking if any graduates of the program could come to help them. It was exactly the kind of situation that the university had been created to address. Minji immediately began organizing a response team, including recent graduates who specialized in crisis management. They would take emergency supplies and equipment that could help the colony establish sustainable food production. It would be dangerous traveling to such a remote location, but helping struggling communities was their primary mission, Daeho asked if he could go with the rescue mission, but his parents said he was still too young for such dangerous work. He was disappointed but understood that he needed more training before he could take on such responsibilities. Instead, he helped prepare the emergency supplies that the team would carry. The rescue mission was successful and the colony was saved from starvation. The graduates who led the mission reported that they had not only solved the immediate crisis, but had established permanent growing systems that would prevent future problems. Another human settlement had been secured through the knowledge that originated on their station. As word of the successful rescue spread, more colonies requested assistance. The university began organizing regular missions to help struggling settlements throughout human space. Each mission provided practical training for students. While building goodwill and strengthening the bonds between human communities, Minji realized that they had created something far greater than she had ever imagined. What started as personal survival had grown into a movement that was helping to secure humanity's future among the stars. Every person they trained and every colony they helped made the human presence in space more stable and sustainable. The Earth Colonial Council announced that they were creating a new position called Director of Agricultural Security and offering it to Minji. The job would give her authority over food production policy for all human colonies and unlimited resources to expand. Her programs. She discussed the offer with her family during one of their evening walks. The position would mean more travel and administrative work, but also the chance to help even more people. Guan said he would support whatever decision she made and offered to help manage the expanded responsibilities. Daeho surprised them by saying he thought his mother should take the job. He said that her ideas needed to reach as many people as possible because food security was the foundation of everything else. Without sustainable agriculture, human expansion into space would eventually fail. Minji accepted the position, but insisted on maintaining their station as the headquarters for all programs. She would travel when necessary, but her heart and her most important work would remain here among the gardens that HFY